Hey everybody, welcome to Tuesday. I'm going to talk about freedom of expression, censorship, and gaming today. Again, I know I've talked about this, but something crystallized for me playing Disco Elysium, and I wanted to unpack it. Now, this is a perfect time to unpack these sorts of things because it's the January traffic slump on YouTube. People just are not paying attention. This year's especially bad, but this happens to my channel every January. People just aren't back in their routines yet. So that means I can talk about what I want to talk about thanks to Patreon supporters. So if you like this kind of content that doesn't get the same traffic because of the YouTube algorithm, but is interesting, at least I think it's interesting, help support this channel, become a monthly patron, patreon.com/Leanna K. Now, this is inspired by me playing the game Disco Elysium, which is an awesome game. My only quibble with the game is on a self-censorship point. And I'm not going to be too rough on the developers of the game, because I totally understand from a practical standpoint why they did what they did. It just, to me, dilutes the artistic integrity of the work and at times is very dissonant. And specifically what I'm talking about is that I have to back up and explain what Disco Elysium is for people who don't know. Don't worry, no spoilers. Disco Elysium, the best way I can describe it, because if you look up the synopsis of the game, it's not very informative. The reason I haven't played Disco Elysium to this point is because I looked up what the game was. I watched the videos and it's like, this doesn't seem like my thing. It's absolutely my thing because it's, Disco Elysium is to Planescape Torment the way James Joyce's Ulysses is to the Odyssey. Meaning there's a structural connection because it's sort of a retelling of the same basic ideas, but all the loftiness, all the epic is stripped out of it. So it's just, a series of pub crawls, or in this case, a detective who drank himself into amnesia instead of, a cool guy with like dreads and scars and tattoos and all that stuff. It's a tacky necktie instead of a talking skull and all that stuff. And one of the things I'm enjoying about the game, and this goes to, my one quibble with it, is the fact that it shows how awful, how dystopian, how cruel and combative, how dog-eat-dog Hobbesian these worlds are when you strip away all the fantasy gloss, right? When it's not elves hating dwarves and you don't have that level of separation, it's just frigging racism, right? when it's, not the drow keeping their man slaves and stuff. It's just like gendered subjugation. And that's the thing that I went, and I found dissonant about Disco Elysium. They'll have outright Yellow Peril style racism in the game. And this is not a criticism of the game. Because of the, it's not elves and dwarves, it's actual people that we can connect to people in the real world. We see how freaking racist it is. But they pull their punches on gay slurs. They actually asterisk the word out in the game. Instead of doing what they do with races, they're not calling Asian people Chinese or Japanese. They're Singolese, not spelt like Singhalese Sri Lankan people. It's spelt differently, but based on the portrait of the lieutenant, who is he's sort of like what's his name, Dakon in Torment, the sort of man of few words, voiced by Mitch Pileggi. He's clearly Asian, and people are clearly racist to him. And they make up words for the race, but it's Yellow Peril racism, like straight up. And it's good that they show it's horrible because it's part of the commentary of the game. But then you meet these two street urchins. They're little shits. And they're like, Chavies times 1,000. And they've got foul little mouths. But they asterisk out the gay slurs. And, at first I'm like, all right, maybe this is just the way they do it in the game. But no, it's only gay slurs. They're privileging one type of discrimination over other type of discrimination. What I would have done, I would have come up with alternative gay slurs the same way they had alternative racial slurs. But I think the calculus, and this may not have been conscious, this may have been instinct, hear me out, is that they're like, well, Asian people probably won't try to get us canceled for yellow peril stuff the same way very loud, vocal, not terribly nuanced LGBTQ plus activists on Twitter will cancel us with a screen grab taken out of context of that word. And I kind of get where they're coming from on this to a point, because, one of the more controversial elements, it wasn't a huge controversy, but one of the more controversial elements of the game is that when they won a bunch of awards, they thanked Marx and Engels. If you play the game, communism figures very heavily. You're not forced to be a communist. You can be an anti-communist, or you can not. You can I don't want to be a part of this, which is how I'm playing the game. But I don't think it makes communism look great, personally. But they're not going out of their way to vilify it either. But they also used voice cameos from a podcast called the hosts of the podcast called Chapo Trap House. And one of the things that Chapo Trap House is known for is calling supporters of Joe Biden gelatinous 100-year-olds, calling Pete Buttigieg a bloodless asexual, and referring to Michael Bloomberg, saying he should lose so badly that this midget gremlin won't have a shot even with $1 trillion. The crowd hissed at the mention of Elizabeth Warren's name, invoking the snake emoji that people sent to Elizabeth Warren on social media after she got into a public spat with Bernie Sanders, so on and so forth. They're not known for taking the high road, let's say. And so this is why I'm saying it wasn't equal opportunity. We're going to treat everyone equally, which means we're going to have bad people in the game, and people are just going to have to deal with bad people being in the game, because it's not a nice world. It's torment without the gloss. There's a reason it's called torment, right? But instead, they privileged this one type of discrimination over other type of discrimination. The minute you're making homophobia, say, or anything, but in this case it's homophobia, a greater sin than racism, you are saying homophobia is worse than racism, and you just can't do that and claim equality, right? You can't. That's its own form of bigotry. You are biased in favor of allowing one sort of offensive content, but not letting another in. And that is a choice. That is a creative choice. In this case, I actually think artistically, it took the punch out of these little brats. And it actually didn't make much sense because, they go in graphic detail about lewd things done to corpses, but they won't say the gay slur word. It just seemed disingenuous in that moment to me, with all the other vile stuff people are spewing in the game. But again, I understand this form of self-censorship. And that's where I sort of had an epiphany that the version of radical free speech versus this deplatforming, these extremes, are actually combining to force creators into a state of ludicrous anti-art, anti-expression, self-censorship. Hear me out. And you notice I'm not using the slurs because I don't need to use the slurs in this point. There's no need to offend people in that way in this context. I didn't use the specific racial slurs as well. I simply referred to the phenomenon of yellow peril. Everything's being treated equally. But instead of everything being treated equally, saying the words, I'm doing everything treated equally, saying none of the words because of YouTube's monetization policies. Say that's censorship. You'd be right. I can't do anything about it. I don't set the rules. And that's the issue for creators in this world right now. They're not setting the rules. Everybody's caught in this world where the radical free speech activists will fling horrible, awful invective at you for months if they don't like something you're doing. And then the cancel culture people will fling horrible, awful invective at you while they're trying to get your game pulled. The shining example of this was the backlash by fans of The Last of Us 2, who sent really awful stuff to the voice actress who provided the voice of Abby. It was not her face, it was not her body, it was just her voice. But for some reason, out of the 3 people that came together to make that one digital woman, none of whom wrote the character, none of whom decided to make her kill Joel, people decided to say, I hope you die, to the voice actress. It makes no sense. I think the person got dogpiled in their own right, but the account was not suspended by Twitter. Twitter was saying this is appropriate behavior. I never understand why people go after a voice actor for taking paying work. If you think the performance is not great, fine, say so. But why directly target the person for invective because you don't like a plot twist? I have never understood that. It stifles creativity because here's the thing, okay? Some of the people flinging nastiness and wanting to scream the loudest so that they will be heard and they will bully creators into their side of the culture war, all you're doing is weighing these creators down, okay? You're just wearing them out. You're burning them out. You make it less likely that they're ever going to make a video game again as opposed to getting what you want. Because here's the thing, from experience, okay? The people you're yelling at when you're not yelling at the creative director of a project, they have no power. They probably agree with you. And they're just like, please make it stop. Very likely they objected to the very thing you don't like behind closed doors. They can't agree with you in public because they're gagged by an NDA. But you yelling at them won't change a single thing. You actually might get them in more trouble because a lot of creative directors aren't terribly self-aware and they'll either go, why didn't you say something? That's the typical asshole creative director move. Why didn't you say something when they get into trouble for a decision on the game when you did? They were just so up their own ass they didn't listen. The underlings always get blamed in a dysfunctional workplace. So keep that in mind. That's why I think there do need to be some rules of engagement. It's one thing to say, yes, you have the right to do this. It's another thing to say you are being totally ineffective and in many cases counterproductive. Because The people who claim to want more diversity in games, which, let's face it, it's not true. They just want more people like them in games, the same way that, I mean, it's almost worse, right? That the people that want the anime boobs, that's not, these are guys, right? These aren't people like them. It's almost like bomber girl art. It's just like some patron saint of hope and comfort with boobs. Like that I've determined is the purpose of these anime booby girl games. And Azure Lane, the game, brought me to that epiphany. But so they just want that. They want like literal comfort pillows, okay? Which you can order body pillows of your favorite waifus. This is a thing. But, you know, so they just want sort of that. The motivation for people who only want games full of people like them is the same, only it kind of sounds more nefarious when you put it that way, but it is still a comfort thing that people are tribal, and for all their don't discriminate, they themselves are discriminating by only wanting to be confronted with media featuring characters that make them personally comfortable. And they all have to make them personally comfortable. If there's one they're bothered by, they won't focus on the 9 characters they like. They'll go after that one character, especially if they are gay, trans, cisgendered female, or any race other than white. They will go after them far more savagely than the straight white cisgendered man who just, well, he's a straight white cisgendered man. They're just sort of dismissed so they can go on about their business. Everybody else gets savaged, either not being stereotypical enough, like the sexism wasn't stereotypical enough in The Queen's Gambit, for instance, not a video game, but still, first example that came to my head, or for, being stereotypical in this one way, even if it was an exploration of the stereotype. There's no winning. So, and nothing else cuts through because these two extremes are so blinking loud. Is this an environment where people can freely express themselves? No. It's an environment where everybody's freaking terrified. They're not sleeping because they're so stressed out, waiting to get shit on by thousands of people for a decision that was not their fault. I speak from experience. I can't get into the details because I don't know if I can talk about it, but what I will say is, I've lost fights both in game dev and on TV, and I've lost sleep just waiting to take shit because for some odd reason, if there's a lone female creator, for instance, on stuff, she gets blamed for everything involving women, like the voice actress on The Last of Us 2, right? She gets blamed for anything that happens to a female character, even if it wasn't her call, right? I cannot describe how ruinously ill waiting for that hammer to drop is. And does a person under those circumstances turn in their best work? Absolutely not. Are they motivated to go to work? Absolutely not. That's what the culture war is doing to game devs, okay? We're all sitting around waiting to eat shit for shit that isn't our fault. And the worst, which is, why I was particularly sensitive to, the anti-Asian racism in Disco Elysium. Again, defending the choice. Just, there was a project I was working on that ended up not going forward. And I had even though there was no more money in it for me because it didn't go forward, but I dodged a bullet in that there were things involving an Asian character, decisions were made above my pay grade, that I didn't agree with. But it wasn't my call. It was above me. But of course, my name would have been on the game as a writer So it's very likely people would have called me a racist for a choice I didn't agree with, right? Sitting there waiting for that shoe to drop and knowing there's nothing you can do beyond sucks donkey balls, okay? This is what the reality of game dev is now. Because it's not, you can't even defend yourself, right? Because of those NDAs. You can't say, this wasn't my decision, don't yell at me. Because depending how binding that NDA is, that's a violation. You just talked about something relating to work product. Now the boss that forced you to do that racist thing can now sue you for saying you were forced to do this racist thing. This is why NDAs or sexist thing or homophobic thing, so on and so forth. This is why NDAs in games, I believe, are too broad, and that there should be some sort of whistleblower protection in NDAs. You should be able to speak about mistreatment. You should be able to speak about things like that. No contract should force you to take a public drubbing like that. Granted, decent bosses step up and say, wasn't their fault, was mine. Yell at me. By the way, I see your point, my mistake, mea culpa, right? But somebody who here's a complaint of, I think this might be racist, and forces a person to do it anyway, not a good boss, right? I think we can all sort of agree on that. They're not really practicing empathy. But that's what the reality in game dev is right now. And the reality is, you guys aren't going to like hearing this, but both extremes of this, the cancel culture types and the radical free speech types, are contributing to this culture. Because think about it. If we take out the cancel culture, all right, fine. The thing about cancel culture is you can avoid that just by shutting your mouth, right? With the vitriol people fling at you online, you can't even look at your Twitter feed without, napalm vomit barf being your entire Twitter timeline because free speech. You're in a complete catch-22. Somebody doesn't like what you did, bleh, all over you, and you can't say, screw off. I don't want your word vomit all over me, because that's censorship. You are forcing people to stand there up against a wall while you verbally beat on them. This is not good for the industry. And this is why we gotta separate legal, like protecting free speech in the public square and protecting freedom of expression in artistic communities. And again, you're not gonna like it, but freedom of expression doesn't work in a cancel culture, okay? Remember Tipper Gore and the, explicit lyrics things on hip hop albums? That actually helped the sales of hip hop albums. Meanwhile, Madonna grabbed her crotch and her concerts were banned in certain cities. Like, you can't make a living if you're canceled for offensiveness. This all happened at around the same time. That's why I picked, Madonna did that? Yeah, there was a time where that happened. And Madonna at the time said, Michael Jackson grabs his crotch every show. You don't ban him. Fair point. The fact, the craziness around Rammstein, I think, is insane. Like, these are not environments where artists can challenge the status quo, and embodying or invoking something challenging does not mean you agree with the challenging thing. It means you want to have a discussion about it as an artist, like as a creator. That's what it means. It doesn't mean you agree with it. Sometimes it's really clear people do agree with it, but but then you've got the radical free speech side that, I'm sorry, is just a hypocritical position. Now, the way it's utilized, there is hypocrisy on that control left cancel culture fringe, but it's obvious, right? They spew vitriol at people and then they report people when people respond in kind. That is easy to pick out. The hypocrisy on the radical free speech side is harder to crystallize. And what it comes down to is that all the noise is silencing people. It's free speech for the loudest minority, not free speech for the majority that just don't want to be worn down. This sort of radical free speech may on paper fulfill the letter of the concept of free speech, meaning anyone can say everything they want to say, right? But in practice, it's actually minimizing the number of people who speak. It's actually inhibiting or completely taking away freedom of expression for the vast majority of people who don't want to draw that fire. And that's the hypocrisy. If you believe in a free speech environment, you can say, I defend vulgarity in principle, but I am not going to participate in it because I want to be the ideal of freedom of expression, which is an open marketplace of ideas where the flow of information is maximized. So I'm not going to participate in that petty stuff, even though it's allowed. And I just hope that some people, now that they hear that all they're really doing is burning out creators, I'm hoping that some people of goodwill who have just not thought of it this way will take a second thought, and because they truly believe in freedom of expression, they will dial back the nastiness. Just because you can say it doesn't mean you should. Just because you can say it doesn't mean it's effective. And let me tell you, they might, the cancel culture mob, they might be shutting people up. They're not changing anyone's mind, quite the opposite. They're pushing people in the opposite direction. And I know you guys don't believe me because you don't see it, but they are loathed, okay? The cancel culture mob is loathed. Nobody who is a creative professional likes those people because they're unpredictable in a lot of ways. They'll let certain things go and go crazy on other things because they have their own blinders, right? Because again, they only want content featuring people like them. But creators know, because we see stuff like Disco Elysium censoring one kind of bad human behavior while not censoring the others, and it's glaring. And on the one hand, I kind of give them that. They made it so glaring that, and ham-fisted, that they gave me an opportunity to talk about it. It was like their own little bit of protest against the artistic straitjacket. But at the same time, as a player, I'm experiencing that straitjacket, and it's kicking me out of the game because these characters were not characters that would check their language in that regard. Why use a word you can't use? It doesn't make sense. And I looked to see if there was any sort of controversy. They had to go back in and edit it. Maybe they did and I missed it. I couldn't find anything. But again, much like the Sony censorship issue, I think it's pretty clear I don't like it. I want to go easy in this case because I totally understand why they're doing it. It just makes me angry because we are de facto, what's happening here is we are privileging, how do I put this? We are privileging, homophobia and transphobia as being this bad thing, or we are privileging LGBTQ plus causes And the reality is that that's the one people are the most sensitive to, because the people with a platform, the people with a voice in gaming, are overwhelmingly white. And so that's the one they can relate to the most. The racism gets a pass because they're not as personally sensitive to that. And so not only is there less of an uproar, when people do say, this bothers me, it's more likely to get dismissed. Or worse, they're talked over and told why it's totally fine. And that's not okay. We need to take those blinders off. And the only way we can take those blinders off is by not privileging one form of human rights over the other forms of human rights. And hence me going back to this idea, my rights end where yours begin. And that is true of all rights. A right, positive or negative right, cannot infringe on another person's right, because then their rights are being infringed. So I hope that people will think about that, and before you knee-jerk, no, free speech, more free speech, more free speech, right? You actually stop and you actually think and you actually hear what I'm saying. Because if you're going to knee-jerk, you're not, as Disco Elysium would say, a moralist. You just want to scream. You're just barfing catharsis all over the place and hiding that behind an alleged political position. But screaming does two things. One, it's catharsis. You're getting the bad feelings out. Primal scream, right? Or you're trying to shut someone up. So if you're one of those people who are screaming, flinging dirty words at people, it's one of those two things. Figure out which one it is. All right. Hope you liked this video. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/LeannaK. Thanks for watching.